Now we're on. Hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Karen Boite. This is
Fred Hahn.
This is
Laura Walton.
I am a member of the Ontario Autism Coalition, and we do Facebook Lives from time to time. The camera's over there. I should look over there. That would make me more of a professional, which I am not. I'm just a mom from Scarborough. I'm also a member of our board of directors. I am part of the executive. From time to time, we do Facebook Lives, and we're trying to reach out to members of our community, reach out to the people who work with our children, those of us who are parenting children on the autism spectrum. Our Facebook Lives are Q&A, freestyle, easygoing conversations. I ask people to send me questions in advance, which I have here written down and printed out, and I'm going to start talking to Fred and Laura and get them to introduce themselves. Please feel free to post questions as we go, and at the end we'll definitely scroll through and see who is watching. A lot of people watch these videos after they tuck their kids in, so we may have a lot of people join us, and we just sort of jump in rather than wait, because you never know. Like, we have 3 people now. We could have 30. We could have 300,000.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
So, hi. Who the heck are you, Fred?
So I'm Fred Hahn. I'm the president of CUPE Ontario. CUPE is the Canadian Union of Public Employees.
Yeah.
And I'm the provincial president for our whole union. Yeah.
Well, that sounds simple.
Yeah.
Easy job?
Easy job, not an easy job. We are the largest public sector union in the province. We have about 270,000 members. We have workers who work for cities and towns, like in municipalities, in healthcare, in social services, which is where I worked, at universities. And then we have about 55,000 members in school boards in every system all across the province. And that's where Laura comes in, because she leads all of our school board workers.
Okay, so who are you, Laura?
So my name's Laura Walton. I am the president of the CUPE's Ontario School Board Council of Unions. I'm an EA by trade, and have moved into and transitioned my way into this role, I guess, in November. Yes. So now I am honored with charging ahead for 55,000 against Doug Ford.
Sounds good. I like the sound of that. So let's just start real simple.
Yep.
Okay. What's a union, Fred?
Yep.
What is a union?
A union is an organization of workers who work in the same workplace, who come together and want to have a collective voice with their employer. Now, I mentioned we have a bunch of different sectors, and unions can represent different sorts of workers, but they're organizations that workers can join to have a voice in the workplace, but not just in the workplace. Our union is very clear that our members' lives don't start and end at the workplace door. They have families, they live in communities, they care about their communities. And so for us, a union is also very much part of a social justice voice to advocate.
So they might be parents and patients.
All of our members
have families.
Are parents, they are grandparents, they are caring for aging parents at home, they are caring for children. We have lots of our members are parents of children with autism. In fact, we're profiling one of them in our monthly or in our quarterly newsletter this time around, because this is such an issue. And our members, basically, when we have more than 250,000 people who live in Ontario or CUPE, basically everyone.
250,000. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just a couple.
That just made, whoa. So what professions fall under the umbrella of CUPE? You mentioned school workers. And just to give people a scope of all of the people that you're representing.
For sure. In universities, we have folks who are teaching assistants, so they do the bulk of the teaching at most of the universities now, but we also have folks who do the physical plant and maintenance stuff, food service workers, service staff, that kind of stuff. In social services, we have childcare workers, we have people who work for developmental services, which is where I worked. We have folks who work for children's aid societies. We have people who work in homeless shelters, women's shelters. In healthcare, we have folks who work in hospitals, in long-term care facilities, for CCACs, the community care access centers, who provide home care. It's a huge range. In municipalities, we have everyone from folks who work in libraries and childcare centers run by municipalities to folks who clear snow and pick up garbage and treat our water. So all of the folks who work for cities and towns across the province. And then in schools, we have everyone who basically isn't a teacher or a principal in a school. You know, the custodian, the maintenance worker, the education assistant, the early childhood educator, the speech and language pathologist, the child and youth workers, the school secretaries, you could keep naming them, and there are so many.
There's 264, I believe, classifications in school board.
Wow. So essentially everyone who is not a teacher, as you just
not
said.
a teacher and not a principal. That's
so you're
right.
not a busy guy at all.
Right?
Okay.
I got Laura to help me.
You mentioned that you, in your past life, worked with people with special needs children. Can you tell us what you do?
Yeah, I worked in a group home. Originally it was a residential setting, so kids lived there full time. They went back to their families every weekend, every other weekend, but we were with them Monday through Friday. We did all of their school stuff, all their IPRC stuff, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I worked with kids at different ages, so I started working with kids that were about 8 or 9, 10. Then I went and worked with very young children, starting at a year's age. By the time I left my workplace to become more active in the union, full-time residential stuff was gone, and it was all respite care.
So there were or are children the age of 8 in group homes in Ontario?
Not any longer. Not any longer. Full-time placement in group homes is virtually gone now, and the services that are available to families, as many of your coalition members will know, if they're lucky enough, they can get some respite care.
Right.
So when I left frontline work, I had 150 families on my caseload that cycled through available respite.
Yeah, and you went to IPRC meetings.
I did go to IPRC meetings as the parent. It was very strange because we were the surrogates for the parents when the kids were actually in care.
What was that like for you?
Well, those were very different days. I mean, you know, we're talking about a few years ago now.
Yeah.
And the systems have changed so greatly.
Yeah.
And I would say the needs of in schools have changed greatly, and the needs of kids have changed greatly from those days.
One day I'd like to ask you more about that. Laura, so you are an EA by trade.
I am.
Okay. Can you tell us about how you got your first job back in the day as an EA?
Yep. I was fortunate. I'm the daughter of an administrator, and so I grew up in the school system. Actually, my father retired from the same board that I worked for. Right. So I really grew up in the system, and I knew that I wanted to be involved in working with students with special needs. So I chose to become an EA rather than a teacher, because at that time, back in the day, there was a much closer connection. Right. Because you were working with smaller groups than a classroom full.
So what year are we talking about?
I started
if you want to admit.
No, I started in the early 2000s. So just after there was a hiring freeze after the Harris conundrum, that's what I'm going to call it. And then I started in after that. So I was the first wave of EAs that were coming out that were more significantly trained. I had a BA and then went through and took additional training as well. So we were this wave of folks that had come through, that had chosen this as our profession. And so we had come through that way.
So how is it different now? Are people
We're more
hired in
trained
a
now.
different way? Okay.
We're more trained now.
Okay.
So typically people, how do they get hired? And it differs. Like there's no one hard and fast rule.
Sure.
So typically what happens is there's a posting goes out into the newspaper or on the web. Folks tend to be hired into a casual pool where they do supply work for a number of years before they become permanent staff. And then they move into a permanent role. And then, you know, hopefully the funding maintains and they're able to maintain their full-time employment until they retire. Right. But that isn't always the case.
It's not always the case.
No.
Have you ever seen, a lot of people are I think, confused, myself included, as to what EAs do. And I understand that because we have 32 different school boards, the answer, 72, 72, see, told you, pretty, just pretty, that's it. 72 different school boards. Have you ever seen a job description?
Yes, I've written
for an
them.
EA? So you've written them. Is that across the board?
It's not across the board. It
Okay.
would be our preferred preference. That would be something that we would be encouraging
Yeah.
our locals to do.
Yeah.
But job descriptions are written in conjunction with the employer, right?
Okay.
The union just doesn't sit down and craft one off and say, here's what we're going to be.
So you don't get to decide.
No, you should be working collaboratively with your employer to create a job description.
Right. And the
Yeah.
employer is the school board.
The school board. And that's part of the
I'm
challenge.
sorry
here,
if I'm being too obvious, but
Yeah.
there are some people watching who are brand new to Canada,
Mhm.
and brand new to the school system. They're just enrolling their kids, maybe under duress. And so, I apologize to anybody if I'm stating the obvious, but just
And it's
want to make it real clear.
It can be really difficult though too, right?
Yeah.
Because not only will it differ between school board to school board,
Mm-hmm.
but the work of an EA can differ between school to school, between secondary school and elementary school, between a program support classroom versus a more intensive life skills or a regional program.
Mm-hmm.
It can vary between what classroom you're assigned to,
Yeah.
what the expectation will be. So they tend to be fairly broad in job descriptions when we write them anyways, to try and incorporate everything that could possibly
be
be done.
up.
Yes.
Because
And we
one of
don't
the-
deal with just one type of student, right? So
Yeah.
it could be anything from
Yeah.
medical to learning disabilities to autism to communication to deaf and hard of hearing to visually impaired, like all of those will come into it.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges for our members because they've been trying really hard to have some more consistency. When people think of schools, they think like a teacher's a teacher, right?
Right.
A principal's a principal.
Yep.
But in our case, for the majority of our members, it really can change based on the board and the employer and
The year.
and the year.
Mhm.
And it's that's challenging, I think, for kids. It's challenging for parents. It's also challenging for our members.
Yeah. Have you ever been reassigned during a school year? Or are your members often reassigned?
I have seen opportunities where people have been reassigned.
Mm-hmm.
There's a number of factors that go into it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a funding issue,
Mhm.
right? The funding is just not continued. So sometimes in order to try and have some flexibility, boards have created positions that allow for some reassignment because maybe there's a new student with much higher needs that comes into one school.
Yeah.
And so they will reassign. It's typically not the norm. We try and go for September to June because that's the best way.
Yeah.
Sometimes the reassignments happen because they need to happen though
Yeah.
too, right? And we are always very cognizant of the fact that not all matchups are good matchups.
Yeah.
Right? And so sometimes for everyone, it's important that we have an opportunity, but we do try for the consistency through the year.
I think there might be a parent watching this whose head is now exploding because they have a child with whose autism affects them severely, who has needs, who have gone through the IPRC process, and the recommendation has been the child needs a one-to-one. They start off the school year with their EA, and then boop, EA is gone, and there doesn't seem to be any explanation. That's a very common story in our community, which is why I'm asking you about you. Have you been reassigned, or are you familiar with lots of people who've been plucked out? I remember having a conversation with a school trustee who, in a very kind but interesting tone, said, "Well, my darling, we have a reactive system, not a proactive system."
They do.
And I learned that when somebody else with very high needs shows up into another school, EAs are often plucked out, and that's frustrating for parents. I know, look, poor Laura's like,
It's frustrating for us too.
well, yes,
Because 9 times out of 10, when those reassignments happen, I think it's important for people to know that it's not uncommon for those to happen on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
And the EA does not get a chance to say goodbye.
Goodbye.
They're just told that they're going to show up at XYZ Elementary the next day.
Yeah.
So I think that, it's a very reactive process. Is it the best? No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of, and we don't always know as the union.
Yeah.
We're not always privy to why that reassignment has taken place.
Yeah. So you're not part of that conversation.
No.
You're not part of that decision.
No.
Okay.
We get an email. Like
Yeah.
most boards would send an email saying, hey, we're reassigning Karen to XYZ Elementary as of March
Yeah.
19th.
What's that like for someone who's working hard with a child to suddenly have to move to a new school? What's
Well,
that like?
I mean, it's incredibly difficult. People not only form relationships, but they also form, they know each other. They get to know each other. They get to know the triggers that the child's had. They get to know how to avoid getting a child triggered. They get to know how to work with somebody, and they've built that rapport, and then they have to go, first of all, leave that without much notice.
Yeah. Yoink.
And now go to redevelop it with somebody brand new.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the number one fears right now for a lot of our members, knowing that April 1st is coming up, is just what does that look like?
We'll get to that, right? We'll get to that. Thanks, guys. How often do you see one-to-one supports assigned to children with high needs?
Not very often.
No, less now than ever.
Less now than ever? Do you have maybe you can't come up with a ballpark, but do you have
a
sense of how often that happens?
What are some results
So we did a survey that Laura, we had shared with Laura, Laura,
where can people
not this
find
Laura.
that? Where can people find that
I'm
survey?
not sure if it's out, but I can find it.
Okay,
Okay,
awesome.
I can back to you.
Great.
So we actually asked our EAs that question exactly.
Yeah.
So 76% of the respondents said that the number of students they support has increased over the last 5 years. And of those that said that the number had not increased, it was because they were already working with more than 5 students. Less than 8% of our EAs work with just 1 student.
Okay.
So we represent the major, I think we had over 2,000 respondents to this.
So 8% of 2,000 people that
Yeah,
responded
almost.
to that survey
Work one-on-one.
are
only 8%
one-to-ones.
are
Yes.
And everybody else is responsible for how many more children? Would an EA
60% of the respondents work with more than 5 students.
more than 5
in a
students?
day.
Okay. Okay. So we're living in interesting times, guys. The Ontario Autism Program has moved from a needs-based, clunky, awkward program that we at the Ontario Autism Coalition were hoping to help improve, and now it's been blown to smithereens.
Yeah.
We think there's going to be at least 8,000 to 9,000 children who are on the autism spectrum who have high needs, because they have been in a full-time therapy program, will be, without transitioning, without planning, will be plopped into the school system. We've also learned today that the ministry has no intention, or we think have no intention of hiring. There's a hiring freeze. There will be no more EAs. Those 5-to-1 with that 5-to-1 ratio for children who previously have had a 1-to-1 ratio with trained therapist instructors. Okay, so batten down the hatches. So what's my question, Karen? My question is, what's your reaction to that, guys?
Well, I mean, look, for parents, for kids, for work, like there is nobody for whom this is a good idea. And frankly, I would say that for the government too. I don't know what they thought they were fixing here. This message line of like, look, we've gotten rid of a waiting list, so everybody's getting something. It's not working. It's clearly not working. Parents and families are telling them it's not working. But what's really worrisome is that on April 1st, how will this work? Our members are unsure of that. Families are unsure of it. I would wager others in schools are unsure about it.
Oh, yeah.
And yet, here we are. It's March 15th.
Yeah, we're 10 days away, I guess. Maybe
About that.
about 10 days away. So what's the chit chat at the water cooler like for you guys?
I think folks are really overwhelmed. And I think one of the things that's really important is many of our members that we represent who are EAs have really strong relationships that they've built with families. They work as respite workers for families. They work as instructor therapists for families. Many of our workers, because of the low pay that EAs, we make about $37,000 a year, and we're laid off for 2 months out of the year.
So you're not paid in the summertime?
No, we were not. We are not paid in the summer. So we're all laid off. Yeah.
So what you get laid? So what? You get rehired every September? That's weird.
Yeah.
It is weird.
That's weird.
Welcome to our life.
Yeah.
So for a lot of our folks, who especially we have a lot of people who are single wage earners. So they're working as respite workers. They're working as instructional therapists.
Right.
They're working outside of the home in order to supplement the income within the school. So they're even more so worried because they're worried about what school's going to look like, but they also feel this pressures from the families as well, because they know what we're getting into. And there's a lot of questions being asked and nobody really has answers for anyone. So it's very scary.
So it's very scary. There's a lot of confusion. I had hoped, actually, because I had approached you guys quite a while ago to do a Facebook Live before everything got blown into smithereens. And I was hoping we could talk a little bit about ABA in the schools. We're not even there. Okay, so we're in 911 emergency. Everybody duck, all hands on deck. But I'd love to talk about that more in terms of training, your feelings about instruction, and even the creation of instructor therapist positions within CUPE, or how that could be negotiated and worked through, all that stuff. It would be really great to talk about that one day. I know it's a big topic.
It's a big topic, but it's one that we would be more than happy to talk about, because our folks are more than happy to do that.
We have a lot of people that are trained
they already do it, right?
We already do that work, right? So we are more than happy to continue doing that work. If anything, we would love to be recognized for the fact that we are able to do that work. Right. And I think that's the big stopper, is that many of our school boards are okay with de-skilling us as just the nice men and women who are there, as opposed to really recognizing what the profession brings to the school board system. It
is really confusing, because now my kid's young. So he's done JK and SK and a little bit of grade 1 while he was in therapy. So my frame of reference is teeny, 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 tiny. I saw incredibly talented EAs, and then I saw people who really didn't understand autism, and they were nice people, right? And the dichotomy between them and the ABA center where my kid goes, where it's all autism all the time, they've got levels of supervision, they're trained, it's a whole other world. And it was a big shock to me that school is a very different experience than the therapy center,
It's one of the reasons why, our people don't often appreciate that. People will hear about PD days, or professional development days for teachers. Our members didn't have access to professional development provided by the employer until quite recently, and it's only because our union repeatedly put it on the bargaining table
Bring
to
these
say,
guys in.
We want training for our people, and whether that be specific training for EAs in terms of the work they're doing with kids with autism, whether that be training around maintenance staff to make sure that they're doing preventative maintenance in school. There's all kinds of things. We didn't have access to any of that stuff until literally just a few years ago.
You had to negotiate it.
You had to negotiate it.
And it's still not funded.
Right. Still not funded. So if someone wants to train, for example, you have quite a lot of training, who paid for that? Who helped you out with that? You did that. So you took it upon yourself to do that.
Yes. And I was fortunate that I was in a position that I could do that.
Right.
But I also recognize that given the pay scale of these, if I was a single wage earner, that would not have been feasible in my life. Right. So it really depends on, we don't have access. Even with the new announcement that came out, they're talking about training up teachers, and we're like, back here on the farm.
What about the frontline?
What about the frontline workers? And I understand what people say. Like, I've gone to a hospital and there's great nurses and there's not so great nurses. I've gone to, the mall. There's some great retail workers. There's not so great. There is dichotomy everywhere, but I do think there's a number of things that are real barriers in our system that are making it difficult. Not having access to, many times during PA days, we were told to go clean the fridge in the staff room. So how do you be recognized as a profession when you're asked to go clean a fridge?
Right. I'd be frustrated. Let's go to people's questions.
Sure.
So parents sent me questions in advance, and they're great. And let's go. So Maria says, I'm sure that this will be covered, but I'm just wondering if he, meaning you, Fred, would be able to go over the roles and responsibilities of EAs. We've touched on that a little bit. What they can do and cannot do. Maybe that's a question that's better for you, Laura. What can an EA do? What can an EA not do?
Well, That is so broad.
It is broad.
Yeah. So the roles and responsibilities of the EA, our main goal as an EA, if you were to ask it, what do I do? It's to support the learning of students with specialized individual needs in the school system in an inclusive setting. That's always our goal. And I always, when I'm talking to people and mentoring people coming in, our goal is to work ourselves out of a job. Our goal is to set it up to the point where our students no longer need us. They are so independent that we are basically redundant.
Yeah.
That's what we should be doing in theory. What they can and cannot do is, it just really depends on your school board, on your principal, on your special education head. Like, I have taught piano lessons to a student with autism because I had a background in piano and he needed a music credit. So I taught piano lessons, but I wouldn't say that piano is
your thing.
A thing, right? Like it's just so right. Our goal is supporting students in that educational setting. That is really what we're.
Would you consider yourself an instructor or a facilitator? What would you consider yourself?
We facilitate.
Because
I think instructor is very adult led, where I think we're more child focused.
Right. Lolly says, "What a great guy to interview." I think so. I think so. Many families that I speak to do not realize that our schools offer different types of supports. Perhaps you can ask him or her to break down the different supports and why students get them. So we're talking mostly about EAs, but there are also SNAs and CYWs. There's so many. I mean, I think those are the three main. In terms of the autism community, like those are the acronyms we hear the most: SNA and CYW and EA.
No, and this goes back to this reality that some of these job titles may in fact do very similar work. Some of them might do very different things. Some boards have an EA is a relatively common, education is relatively common, but there are special needs assistants as
SNA, special needs assistant.
That do the work that could be very similar to an EA, or it could be very different. Child and youth workers tend to do, in some boards, can do one thing and another board can do another. I've actually learned a great deal about this, not having been a school board worker, talking to our members who work in schools, even just randomly, 2 or 3 folks from 2 or 3 boards, and you ask them, hey, like, do you have child and youth workers? And some boards will say, well, no.
What's that?
No, we don't. Our EAs have to do that work. Other boards will say, well, yes, we do, and they function in this way. Other boards will say, well, yes, we do. They deal with high needs behavioral people. Like, it really is. There is really no consistency.
And
so
what's really
what do we do about that?
Well, first of all, educational assistants, or that classification of people, we're not in the Education Act.
Good.
So that's the first little kicker, right? So
perhaps that's a starting point.
Then I always go back, is this really the government that I want to have that conversation with, right? So
it's the one we've got.
Yeah, it is the one we have. It's important to note, though, that when you hear SNA or you hear CYW or you hear EA, it's important for people to go and ask their school board what they call their people. Because walking into a school board and saying, I heard that I need an SNA, probably won't help if all they have are EAs. Or special needs assistants and have no EAs. Or like we have a gambit. We have registered behavior technicians in some school boards. So it really is so you need to find out what it is in that particular
space. Are you guys just as confused as we are then?
What's important to know that our folks have been trying to bargain. We have so what you asked me about, what is a union? And one of the things a union can do is to try to deal with this stuff in a bigger picture way. And so that's one of the things we've been trying to do. Just like we had to go bargain to get funds to do additional training for our members so that they could do the kind of work that they want to do in boards and that parents want them to be able to do. We are trying to bargain consistency so that it's not as confusing, so that there's some clarity here about roles and responsibilities, so that there's some, and we understand there's got to be some flexibility based on the needs of kids and communities, but there should be some more
Yeah.
consistency.
Well, from the parent point of view, and I'm pretty sure I can speak for a lot of people with about our confusion, is we get a lot of paperwork, right?
Mm-hmm.
We get a lot of stuff. We got lists of acronyms. We have our IPRC meeting. We go and we talk about the child's needs and the placements and all that sort of stuff. But it's they're not explained to us. It's like getting a menu with no items on it.
Yes.
It's like going to a restaurant, you know, and you don't know if you're at a steak place or a chicken place or a vegetarian place. You just have no idea.
Well, and then
you know?
once you make the order, because we've noticed
yeah,
it, people sit at
yeah.
IPRCs and they say, okay, we all agree.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
This is what's needed.
Yeah.
And people go, great.
We all go, yes, very much. Thank you very much for your time.
And
Sign
then it
here.
doesn't happen.
Yeah, then it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most of our members who are actually doing the work with the kids aren't the ones sitting in those
meetings.
right? Or in parent-teacher interviews,
Do EAs have access to a child's file to look at the recommendation, the IPRC recommendations?
So with the last government, there was
Yeah.
a big initiative with professional collaboration in that
Yeah.
context of being a team and realizing that we had input and we needed to see these documents.
Yeah.
It, again, goes back to what school, what principal, what school board,
Right.
whether that access is given or not.
Okay.
I'm a big believer in you wouldn't try to put together something without reading the instructions.
Yeah.
So but I'll be clear, I mean, the IPRC, the IEP, they're only guidelines for us. We need to look at the whole child as well, not just what's on that piece of paper, right? But it does really help. But I'm going to tell you that the majority, and when I say the majority, like 99.99% of my members do not know who they're working with until the first day of school. So even if we had access to that paperwork, I would be looking at it as I'm walking down the hallway with your student.
Right. So no
Yes.
time to study
So we
it,
do
to
not
think
come
about
back.
it.
We
Yeah.
do not come back. We are not asked to come back until the very first day of school, and we often don't when we leave the last day of school. So there is no opportunity for us to really do that.
Linda asks, apparently it's not easy to get into training. It's not run often, and there's a limited amount that they can attend. Will this be approved? I know that's another general sort of question. But you talked a little bit about access to training.
I'm wondering if Linda is talking about,
I can read more of her question.
last year there was a pilot project that was launched by the ministry, and I sat on that with one of your members, Michelle Parker, where there was money provided to school boards, but only 18 school boards out of 72.
Okay, so 18 schools got to have
18 school boards.
one pilot project per school board.
Yes. So
So one little
In one
school
yes.
in one school.
Yes. So there was about 25. They were allowed about 25 EAs to be trained in the registered behavior technician program.
Okay.
So I'm wondering, when I'm reading that, I'm wondering if
RBT.
maybe RBT. I know.
Yeah.
Like,
I just throw it out
love
there.
acronyms.
Yep, the acronym.
So I'm wondering if that's what she's referring to.
Maybe.
Because it was wonderful, because it was money that was paid by the government, not just for the tuition, but also paid for them to be either released from their position, or during March break they could be paid, which they're not paid during March break, just so everyone knows.
Right.
So that they would be paid to.
Are you paid during the PA days?
Yes, we are now, but we negotiated that.
You negotiated for that.
Yes. Don't ask me about Christmas.
Okay. All right. Don't ask you about Christmas. This reminds me of, I remember something in the news, so tell me if I've got this wrong. But a few years ago, we used to have kindergarten for just half a day for kids. And then it was expanded into a full day kindergarten. Wasn't there a precedent set for EAs to receive training to become ECEs?
In Toronto.
You know, only in Toronto. See, I'm a Toronto girl. Okay. So, but it is possible to take a large group of people and provide training.
It is absolutely possible, and it has been done. What it takes is resources, right? And political will, right? And an understanding, I would say, by government. So when they were introducing the full day kindergarten, they realized that they needed an influx of ECEs. They realized they had workers in schools who'd already been working with kids but might not have those qualifications.
Right.
And so they made this additional kind of training available, particularly in places like Toronto, where the number of ECEs they needed was massive, right? But the same thing could be done now. with the EAs. It could absolutely be done. It's a question of whether or not they'll fund it and whether or not we can make them fund it.
We can make them. So this pilot project, how did that go? With
Good question.
How did that go?
Good question.
Good question. We have been asking the government for quite some time to follow up because we've had no follow up.
Okay.
I do know that from talking to the locals that we represent, they loved it, right?
Okay.
The opportunity to be able to have intensive working with a BCBA and you know, going through this training and being able to actually put those skills into practice.
Tell me more about that pilot project. Like, so there were 25 EAs that were trained. You said there were some BCBAs.
Approximately 25 to 40 in each school board.
In each school board.
Yeah.
And then
there is
who else was
funding for
hired?
BCBAs.
Okay.
In each school board to oversee because an RBT requires and BCBA oversight.
Yeah.
And the goal of it was so that the EAs who were supporting students in the classroom would be working with the BCBA using RBTV and ABA principles to actually.
There really are a lot of acronyms.
There's a ton of acronyms in our world.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that was.
And we understand each other.
Yeah.
That's why I stop every once in a while and go,
It's the language on
children
CUPE.
Youth Worker.
Yeah. So it was, from what we've heard from them, they loved it. They loved it. They would like more of it.
Yeah. I'd be curious if anybody watches this somewhere along the line and your child was part of one of those programs. Let us know. How did it go? And how's it going?
We're still reaching
We're
out to school boards
curious. We're curious.
apparently it's still magically going on and
It's still, what's what I heard, but,
Yes,
what's going on?
We're working right now. I actually have someone who's been doing that, working to try and find out what's happening.
Right. Georgina asks, hey Karen, can Fred speak to what the actual conflict is if parents were to privately hire an assistant to do work that an EA, SNA, CYW, ERW, XYZ, PUP, aren't necessarily trained or qualified to do, especially if dedicated long-term staff is required. Now I can actually, this is a friend of mine. So I know a little bit about her story. Georgina, forgive me. So she has a boy who is non-speaking, and he has learned to communicate through a letterboard. And keyboards are difficult for him. He's working on it, but it's really hard. It takes a while for him to get his finger there, and then when he touches a key, he might hold it too long, so it's SSSSSS. You're familiar, right? And his mom has taken a whole bunch of courses in rapid prompting method. She calls it something else. Sorry, I will rewind. Anyway, so in order to do his work, he needs someone to hold that letterboard for him because he can't quite manage a pencil. And it requires a very patient person and some training. So her experience is that she'll help somebody, they get pulled. She'll help somebody else, they get pulled. So she wants to hire somebody privately. How come she can't? Or what's the issue?
I think, it's connected to a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
What's the problem that she wants to solve? That people keep getting pulled.
Yeah.
There aren't enough people, right?
Yeah.
And we agree that that's a problem. And one of the things we're greatly concerned about is the way to solve that problem. If parents think that the way to solve that problem is, now I can get it. In the short term, you kind of go, I need this help for my kid.
Yeah.
But in the bigger picture for the system, we're letting the system away with not providing what people should get from paying their taxes, for Pete's sake.
Yeah.
Like, it drives me kind of kooky watching this stuff because, honestly, parents of kids with autism should be able to go into any school in any community and get the supports they need. This should not be like, you should have to jump through hoops and then jump through another hoop and then jump through another hoop, right? I know that people have issues about it being compared to medical stuff, but if you can walk into a hospital and get the services you need, then you should be able to walk into a school and get the services you need.
Yeah.
If there's a prescription for a therapy, then that therapy should be available. We have folks who are skilled and trained already in this because they've gone and done it themselves.
Yeah.
And we have others who want the training.
Who want
right?
it. Yeah.
And so the question becomes, how do we best make this system work for everyone? Because some parents might be able to afford to hire somebody.
Yeah. And
many
others
won't.
Yeah.
And how do we should be building a system that should be able to be there for every kid.
Yeah. That was the biggest shock for me. in signing my kid up when I realized I had to negotiate for my son's education.
Mhm.
That I have to know what a CYW is, and what an SNA is, and an EA, and what a PT is, and what an SLP is, and what an OT is, and I have to know what they do, and I have to know how to ask for them. And I actually can't stop my head from spinning and going like, why? I'm not
Why do
buying
you
a
need to know that?
car.
Yeah.
I'm sending my child to a public school. I don't understand this. But we have this mentality, I think, as parents, because we go to classes and courses and they tell us how to advocate. And even when you go and you learn great things from great people who tell you how to advocate, I just sort of think, why am I going into a meeting about my child, my son? It's not our kids, it's mine.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And that's really hard. Georgina is a friend of mine. I feel her pain because she has an extremely bright child who's working at grade level, but he needs help.
He needs help. And
time to get all that information out. And yet, you know, people are getting yanked from him all the time. And it's restart, restart,
put out
reboot,
fires.
Reboot. Yeah, because you put out fires.
That's
the reactive system.
The reactive system. So,
yeah.
And that's a huge concern, you know, coming up April 1st, is that any of the really great work that has been done so far between September and now, and you see children being successful, there will be a bigger, brighter, hotter burning fire starting April.
Yeah.
And that will mean that other students will miss out because there will be reassignment.
Kristen asks, how can I effectively advocate for an EA for my ASD, autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder child, after several years of being told no funding?
I feel her pain.
Yeah.
I'm a mom of a son with ADHD.
Yeah.
So I totally get it because there is nothing for him at all.
Yeah.
So I do understand it's overwhelming.
What's it like for you to go into meetings with the school?
Well, it's different because I do this for a living. So I often have it all pre-written as to what I want it to look like.
Yeah.
But it's frustrating because, you know, you're trying to get what you know that your child needs. And that's part of what a lot of our members face too, is that we have that many members. So you've got to figure that we as well are parents of children with autism. We are parents who have children who are not neurotypical. Yeah. So we're kind of doing double duty.
But a smarty pants like you, do you get what your kid needs? Are you successful?
No, I don't get always what my child needs. No, definitely not. And you work around it and you hope for the best, and you do a lot of scaffolding at home and a few prayers as they head out the door. But I think a lot of what I have been advocating for is parents working with the EAs, parents working with the trustees, your school board trustees, working together as a team as opposed to being opposed to each other. If we start finger pointing, it all falls apart. And the government, who should be funding this properly, sits back and giggles because they're like, it eats off of me. I'm now going to, and so I try really hard as much as I can to work with the school board trustees and with the school itself and with the EAs that are there, and to try and reach out and, say, we're all fighting the same fight. Let's get all on the same page. And we have the same common place that we need to go to.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice for anybody because it can feel very alone when it's just, you feel like it's me and I got to advocate for my kid. Yeah. And what do I do, right? Yeah. And I think that's why the coalition is so important, because you connect parents to each other. And I think that's why conversations like this are important, because we do have these shared things that we want to achieve together, right? And how do we support each other to do that? Yeah.
Well, we are a coalition of parents, self-advocates, teachers, therapists, EAs, all kinds of folks. We do have fights in our community quite often. And the Facebook Lives are an attempt to shine light, are an attempt to go, look, the people we're talking about, these are real people with real lives who may relate to what you're going through more than you think. There is an awful lot of finger pointing. And we at the Ontario Autism Coalition, we're not about that. We're not about that. So I realize that there will be some moms and dads watching now who will find this information very new, very overwhelming, and very upsetting. This is the real deal here, right? Brix Hilda says, how to respond to hearing from school that they do not have enough support staff. So we know that's the case. And boy, oh boy, is it going to be the case come April Fool's Day. No joke. Despite the IPRC and IEP, individualized educational plan, thank you. We always get told it will be hard to get support because they do not have enough staff. Now, we're told by advocates who teach us that IPRCs are legally binding. So if a parent is not getting what has been stipulated on the IPRC, what should they do?
I think a key element here is that context of don't have enough staff.
Yeah.
The reason we don't have enough staff is because we don't have enough funding. So it's very similar to somebody saying you need to eat a well-balanced diet in order to be healthy. But if you can't afford the well-balanced diet,
right,
you're not going to have
that's
a well-balanced diet. Yes, exactly, right? So
that's it.
And that is
chips are cheap.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Right. So and that's a lot of what happens in this is that there are IPRCs that are legally binding, and schools are working on trying to. But then when they get to the money, the dollars and cents of it, there isn't enough dollars and cents. And so one of the things that we realized when we did this, everybody gets all the same money. That's what happens in school boards and has been happening in school boards for 20 years. Everyone who walks in the door gets $12,300.
Now hold on. Okay, let's go to that $12,300. Let me ask you about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Minister of Education, Lisa Thompson, made a great big announcement of new money.
It's not new money.
It's not new money. $12,000 for every new child going into the, so it's going from the OAP, Ontario Autism Program, into public schools. April 1st, yay, you get $12,000. You get $12,000, you get $12,000.
It's like Oprah Winfrey,
Yeah. Okay. Can you break that down, please?
So when we analyzed it, the $12,300 would be no different than if you had a 4-year-old coming into kindergarten. They're a new student, so they get $12,300. This isn't new money. This is what they fund.
It's part of what the funding formula says.
It's per pupil funding. Like that's
Right.
So what they've done is we're thinking is they've just extended the deadline. Normally we would shut down. They would like close enrollment for schools, right? Because the money would have to go out. This just means that yes, we see that these new folks are coming in, but $12,300 is what every single student, and that has to pay for.
Yeah, that has to pay for. Go ahead.
Everything.
Everything.
So that is your child having a desk and a chair, the school that they're in, the custodian who maintains the security and safety and cleanliness of that school, the secretary who buzzes you in to let them into there, who does the safe schools calls, the CYW, the teacher, the principal, like that $12,300.
So it's not for specific programming, it's for staff.
Well,
is it for photocopying and for
it could be,
paste and paint?
It could be for, that's
the light bill?
Absolutely. That is a pure per pupil funding.
So those kids who will be allotted the $12,000, if they are currently in service in the Ontario Autism Program and they have already registered for school, do they get that money?
We don't know.
Okay.
We'll find out April 1st.
So Nicole says, will EAs be allowed and to be trained to physically restrain? Okay, so I do want to get into restraints.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, viewer discretion. I realize that this issue can be very upsetting. We're just going to talk about it because it is part of the day for EAs, for the children. It's something that nobody really likes to talk about, but unfortunately, we may be faced with some very, very serious situations in the next month. Okay, so how she has phrased this question is, will EAs ever be allowed to be trained to physically restrain should a flight risk present itself. By the way, my son's current EAs are amazing, but previous people, meh, she says. That's what Nicole says. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, training happens in all kinds of boards, but again, it's not necessarily consistent. So we have some people who've been trained in how to do these kind of restraints, certainly around safety, in particular around a flight risk, as this question kind of like
alludes to
a flight risk. Like, I would suspect that people who are going to be assigned there should have some kind of training on how to deal with that. The challenge is we can't guarantee that. We advocate for it. We want people to be trained properly, but the challenge about and you're not wrong, this issue around restraints is a controversial issue. Part of the reason why we keep coming back to these kinds of questions is because there aren't enough people to provide the supports that are needed for kids, so that they don't even get to the place where we're talking about even thinking about it.
That's right, where you can.
Restraint should be, and I think Fred's made a really good point. Restraint should be your last resort, not your go-to, right? And there's so many, if trained properly, and we advocate all the time with locals, and with the government and with the employers that, there are good quality training out there, but there's lots of stuff that needs to go into place before that even is there. And there's things like behavior plans that should be worked on and renewed that are signed off by parents and staff.
I know I'm kind of ambushing you with kind of a hardcore question like that.
No, it's fine.
For me, my Spidey senses start to tingle, right? Like I have, not to talk about me, but my own experience is I've got a child who's highly volatile but not violent, right? So he's very, very susceptible to sensory stuff, and he melts down real quick. But it's not at someone. But if someone was to grab him when he's, freaking out, that doesn't know him, that hasn't had the opportunity to be his friend, that doesn't know that, what, wait 5 minutes, he's going to be okay, he's going to rally, we'll all get up and brush ourselves off and move on, this is really complicated, but there are parents now who are going to be sending their kids to school in April who are flight risks.
Yes.
They are runners.
We know.
And they're terrified, and they want some assurance that their kid's going to be okay.
Understandably.
And it's tough. And I would suggest to anyone that, you're in talking to your school team, that, people are forthright and honest, and let's get some behavior plans put into place so that, there's a series of steps that are taking place that we're talking about. You yourself just explained the different stages of your child's, when they're starting to move through the different phases. Those all need to be documented so that as professionals, we're seeing it and we're able to react in the proper manner. All that stuff needs to be, and when I laugh, we have 10 days. All this stuff needs to be done in 10 days.
In 10 days.
Right?
What's the best way for a parent to communicate with you if they have a child with high needs?
So I'm going to be honest, you're going to get blocked from talking to us.
Okay. So it's really hard for a parent just to talk to you, the frontline person who's going to spend perhaps the most time.
I love when parents are like adamant that the EA is going to be in the meeting. That makes my heart sing because it shows that we're recognizing it as that like collaborative team.
And who's blocking you?
Employers.
The employer. Is that in the rule?
It's not the union, I'll be very clear.
It's not the union. So the employer is that a directive that you're getting? You may not attend this meeting, or? There's
lots of factors. Often meetings are held during the school day. We don't have anyone to cover us. So if we go into that meeting,
So you're working.
So we're working.
That's right. There's nobody else to look after.
We're paid hourly.
Okay.
So if it happens after school.
Right.
We're not paid.
Right.
So there's all of these like factors that implicate, whether we can do it. And there's barriers. Like I'm going to be honest, most of these are not things that are insurmountable.
Please be honest, please.
These are barriers to participation that have just been put up. And we need to work as a team on how to figure out workarounds.
That's right.
Okay. Maria says, can we hire EAs as respite workers as well? I love my EAs.
I worked as a respite worker. Yes.
So you're not going to get in trouble if a parent says, hey,
No.
I've got some funding. Will you come to the house? And
Many of our members, like across the province, do.
they do.
We got folks who are EAs, and then they work perhaps in a community living setting, or they're supporting somebody as an individual. Like,
Yeah.
Right. Linda asks, are they ready to let more EAs into the union? I may not be 100%, but from what I heard, it's not easy to get in with them, and being an EA not in the unions brings a dramatic pay decrease. It's obviously hard to keep good people. So are there non-unionized workers in the schools?
in our schools where we represent people, they're all, from the day they're hired by the employer,
Right.
they're in the union.
Okay.
And they're covered by the collective agreement, and they're making the union wage.
Okay.
There are a few pockets in places across the province where EAs are not in unions. They might be in an association, or even in those cases, and perhaps those, maybe, I don't think, do we have, like, there are any ununionized EAs? Are there some ununionized EAs?
Yeah.
There are, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we do it. We do it. I mean, and you know, blatant plug. We'd love to talk to you.
Yeah, I mean, we're happy to, look, it's not, we would never block people from joining our union. We want them to be, we want more people to be
Yeah. Have you
unionized,
ever
but we
said
also
no
want-
to
Never.
workers who don't want to join?
Never,
Right. So it's like church.
yeah.
Everybody's welcome,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Yeah.
Okay, Janet says, should parents refuse to pick up children who've been sent home from school? So we have done an awful lot of work on exclusions at the Ontario
Yeah.
Autism
Mhm.
Coalition. I really recommend, if you're a new parent, to look through our materials and our past Facebook Lives. There's some very, very good and important information on exclusion, especially in the next couple of months. You're going to want to understand how that works. So you get a phone call. Come get your child. Who makes that decision?
Not us.
Not
Yeah.
the EAs.
No.
So
never.
it's not the EA, it is
the principal.
The
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 principal
only
makes that
person
decision.
that can send a child home is an administrator.
Okay, is the administrator. What should a parent do?
Well, I would just, when I worked in community living, there were situations where people didn't come to pick up their kids, and they called child welfare agencies, and then we got involved through them. I mean, there's a huge risk. It is a terrible situation.
Right.
But I would never, and I don't know what the coalition's advising people, but I would never advise folks to
Well, we advise people to do what they think is best
do what they think
for
is
their
best.
kid.
I guess
Always.
my only
Always. And even if that does mean pulling them out, but to know that if that's not what they want, they don't have to.
My concern,
You know?
always with any child, is the dignity of the child.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
if they are in crisis,
Yeah.
having them there in crisis is not any better for them.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm really child focused. And so there are times where I've had to pick up my own son because it's not the day.
Yeah.
And, that's okay. And in my mind, yes, it's, you go through as you're driving there, all of those things, but it's his dignity and the situation that he is in at that time that you need to really work on.
I think we at the OAC, we don't have a dog in that fight, but we do
Yeah.
suggest to families documentation,
Yes.
please.
Yeah.
You know,
Of course.
so if this is more than a one-off,
Yes.
if the kid's not being invited to the concerts, to the class trips, to the assemblies, being asked to be picked up early, and there's no documentation, then we can't argue for more supports, can we?
Absolutely.
And when it comes to hard exclusions, if there's no documentation, then we have no data
Nothing, yeah.
whatsoever on all of the children who are not attending school. So we hope that people will learn.
Yeah.
Okay, if you want me to pick them up, then I would like something in
Paper,
writing.
yeah.
Please, give me some paper. Maria and Brixhilda. Oh wait, toileting. That's a big thing for our little ones.
Yes.
So what's the deal with toileting?
You do it.
You do it. Mine did.
Dignity of the child.
My kid's teacher did.
Dignity
No
of the
problem.
child.
I mean, I think I was fortunate, but still.
Dignity of the child.
Dignity
always
of the
comes first.
child. Yeah. We hear other stories.
Definitely.
We hear other stories. Now, like we're sort of talking in the abstract, right? So one parent will say this happened. We have no way of interpreting what they've said,
Right.
what they've reported. right? We know that it'll be a very upset person. So the kid's had some accidents, mom's been pulled from work to change the child instead of the child getting help, and it's very frustrating, right? I myself had to leave work in order to accommodate my son, you know?
I would suggest with anything like that, with toileting, if it's not, I mean, it's different when they're coming in 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah.
Right. As they get older, we always ask that there is like some sort of plan laid out.
Yeah.
So that the parent knows that we're going to be toileting, because nobody needs surprise.
Yeah.
Toilet. But that if it is an ongoing medical concern, that we have the appropriate gloves and things that are there as well.
Yeah.
So that we can maintain the child's dignity, but also our health and safety.
Yeah.
We try as much as possible to have 2 people toileting, just so that everyone is remaining safe and respectful.
Yeah.
And we try and prompt first.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Because we go back to that, we're trying to instill independence first.
Is there work that an EA could say no to? I won't do this.
In accordance to legislation,
Yeah.
we have the right to refuse unsafe work.
Okay.
But that would be what is accorded to any employee. There are some limitations to that legislation, but any employee in Ontario has that.
Maria in Brixhilda said, why are EAs not allowed to attend parent-teacher meetings? You touched on that.
We have.
You
They're not
touched on
paid.
that.
They're not paid.
They're not expected. They're not respected as part of the professional team.
Yeah. And sometimes not invited.
They're not invited.
Yeah. Not wanted on the voyage.
Maria also asked, why are families not informed that they will be receiving an EA for their child until the school year starts? So you talked about that. You don't know until
We don't know.
the day after Labor Day.
We don't know.
Yeah.
And we're handed a schedule.
Okay. Deanna says, Fred is amazing.
He is.
I agree. If you have time, I would love to hear his thoughts on addressing violence in the classroom and also the risk of undue hardship, around MPP. All right, she's asking about service dogs. Maybe I won't go into service dogs today because we have so many. So violence in the classroom. Again, it's such a big topic.
It's a big topic, and it's a concern, I think, for everyone. It's a concern for the people who work
Both
in that
sides of the
environment.
coin.
It's a concern for the kids in that classroom.
Yeah.
Often we hear from our EAs, it's not so much that the child with autism is the one who is perpetuating violence. Sometimes they're the one protecting that kid from the actions of other kids, right?
Yeah.
So, there's, it is a challenge, but the way to deal with that challenge is first to acknowledge it exists, and then to actually put in the resources needed to fix it.
Yeah.
Because really, what our members say over and over again, and this is not just, by the way, in schools, but it's certainly in schools.
Yes.
You take somebody who's developed a rapport, you rip them out of that relationship and put them over here, you put them over here, you make them deal with 5 or 6 different children a day. There's not enough time and attention. All of those things just exacerbate the potential of violence. And it's no good for anyone in a school.
Yeah. We've talked about it a lot. If Laura Kirby-McIntosh was here, I'm not all that familiar with this topic. I have certainly friends whose children have meltdowns and violence happens. I've never seen anything that I would describe as a violent act. I've seen very, very upset, overwhelmed children, which is a different thing. I think a trigger for us parents is that that meltdown will be interpreted and that the force and the response to that will be inappropriate.
Yeah.
And we hear stories about that a lot in the community. But again, you're hearing about, the parent is hearing about it later. They don't really get the full story.
Well,
they're not really getting a full report.
We have members who have suffered head injuries for the rest of their lives. They will never be the same.
Yeah.
People who have had broken bones, had surgery.
Yeah.
And so this is traumatizing for families, but for people who are in this work because they care about kids, and they want to do a good job, and then to have this potentially life-altering thing that could happen to them too. Yeah, it is not for anyone. It's just, And that people don't have the information about it is a problem.
Yeah.
It's a problem that our members sometimes don't get, like, so they report this stuff and then what happens after that isn't clear to them.
Yeah.
It isn't clear to families.
Yes.
Like, there has
Yeah.
to be a more comprehensive approach to dealing with
Yeah.
this.
Well, we have members who've pulled their kids from school because they're afraid. Their children are unable to report to them what has happened. They know something has happened based on how the kid is behaving at home, that the kid is highly upset, highly volatile, maybe there's bruising, but they don't know. You know, and they don't get a straight answer from their administrators. And approaching EAs
Is another question.
is another question, because you want to speak to the frontline person and then they're not getting information from the EA. Are EAs not allowed to tell parents what happened that day?
Most likely not.
Most likely not. So you think they've been told?
I think within the school board system, there's not an overt direction,
Right.
but there's a clear fear of reprisal. It's why our members don't report when something happens. Like you're talking about the ones we report on.
Yeah.
The violence that we report.
So if you-
The violence that happens on a regular basis often goes unreported because of fear of reprisal. So when one actually gets reported, we have a number of members who, as soon as something happens, well, what did you do to cause it?
Yeah.
Instead of everyone taking a step back and saying, what were the factors that contributed
that led up to the
to
moment.
this?
Yeah.
And there can be really, really simple. An overpacked classroom.
Yeah.
You know, very clearly we know that this is a trigger for someone, but yet we've got them in that situation.
Yeah.
With no way out. Or, you know, there's lots of things that when calmer minds prevail, you know, you can look back and say, but typically it's
there's so many X factors. Only in my own, I would never have really bought it, understood any of this until I had a child that I have, and it's like living in a video game. You know, the running video game where like, bah! There's a thing and a whoa, and a you know, that's his life, right? And so when there's so many things coming at the kid, what overwhelms him is it's the accumulation of stress and then you know, and the lack of information from schools is terribly upsetting. I think I hear a lot in our page of people accusing an EA of this, that, and the other thing. And I keep wondering about what's the real story? Like, why aren't we just talking about what happened? I hope I'm not preaching to the choir. You know, but it's mystifying to me. And as the mummy, I'm terrified. I like, how could I possibly put my kid into an environment like that, where it's like, just be straight with me. I'm raising him. I know my boy. I know him. I'm raising him. Tell me what happened. I might cry. I might get upset, but tell me, right? Okay, last question, and then if we're well over our hour. Are you okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. We're last question, and then I would like to scroll up. Is that okay? 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Is that all right? Thank you. Lizzie, this is a really long question. Some EAs are contacting the Ministry of Labor, citing workplace violence and unsafe working conditions when they are supporting, from my firsthand knowledge, teens, young adults with ASD. So EAs are contacting the ministry. Teachers and EAs try their best. Principals are, however, enacting a zero tolerance policy for these students. If unfortunately EAs are hit or are required to intervene with challenging behaviors, students are sent home. Okay, so let's just stop there. So we have a zero tolerance violence policy in schools. An act happens. Someone is hurt. Someone on staff is hurt. What can an EA do?
Well, I mean, what we talk to our members about, which we think is actually quite important, and if the system was working properly, people would report occupational health and safety concerns, like violence in the workplace, and it would result in discussion with the employer to have additional resources to fix the likelihood of that violence coming back. right?
Yeah.
That's what's supposed
What's
to
supposed to happen? Why doesn't it
It's
happen,
what's supposed
Fred?
to
Why
happen.
doesn't this happen?
Well, it's because we've actually got this wrecked funding formula that we lived under the Liberals with for a long time, and now we've got a Conservative government that's not just saying it's going to look at the funding formula, sure, but they're looking to take money out of the funding formula.
Yeah.
It's why we've said, for example, in many cases, EAs aren't part of the funding formula. Like it's actually not part of the calculation of what's required.
EAs are not part of the funding formula.
No.
So that thing you need a PhD in calculus to understand, which we have a copy of on an education report on our website, that is not needs-based.
No.
And based on a census data from 10 years ago.
From 10 years ago, and EAs are not part of that picture at all.
We are part and not part. So it's a big bucket of money.
Okay.
Like, here's your bucket.
Here's your bucket.
And then do with it what you see fit.
So different things have to be, they're not funded.
Okay.
So for instance, if you were to look, at the funding formula for, which, oh goodness, you don't want to do, but
no, I
like
don't
it would
understand
say, you know, X amount of students in a grade 4 classroom needs this teacher. And if we had and that's how it's kind of set up.
Right.
When you get this to the special education funding formula, there's a lot of things that come out of it. It could be EA support, it could be extra teacher support, it could be items that they require for OT-PT, for creation of a snoozling room, for transportation, for there's a whole cast of things that come out of that.
Yeah.
So it's not like there's some formula out there that says for every 5 students with special needs, thou shalt get 1 EA. That does not exist.
And it's
Right.
part of the reason why we actually talk to our members about, I think when she's asking about contacting the Ministry of Labor, it's really about complaining around occupational health and safety. And the reason we do that is because, look, we are advocating over here. We're using the tool of bargaining to try and get additional resources. We're trying to work with folks in coalition and communities to try and get resources. One of the other tools in the toolbox is that health and safety stuff, to be able to say, look, then the Occupational Health and Safety Committee is supposed to sit down and say, we need to fix this problem, right?
Yeah.
And to advocate to fix this problem. The challenge we have is that employers then decide the way they're going to fix the problem is to exclude the child.
Yeah. That brings us full circle. Like we see this exclusion issue and the OAP and all that funding. These are all parallel issues.
All parallel.
You know, the trains are just going to the cliff at the same time. And that's what Lizzie, I think, is saying. Students are sent home. So instead of working it through, instead of talking about it, we go home. We have no record of the kid being sent home. We can't come back and talk about it the next day, the day after, or take a break and take a... You know, and I know that people get upset about the moment, you know, and what happened, but it's like, how can we resolve it if we don't talk about it?
Right.
Yeah.
How? Tell me.
Well, we don't, no, and one of the things we advocate
What
for,
do we
even
do?
is in terms of debriefing, like in allowing people to have time to,
Once
you've been through a situation that's difficult, right? Whether you're, the individual, whether you're the kid with autism, whether you're the parent, whether you're the worker who was dealing with that situation, having some time to debrief and to actually think about it and whatever, even that isn't afforded to all of our members.
Yeah.
No, and I was going to say, I know through talking to Laura, and I'm a member of your coalition, you know, people will talk about the high turnover rate that we have. And part of the reason why we have a high turnover rate is there's very little supports put in place for those workers who are trying their best to maintain success for those students.
Yeah.
So oftentimes through no fault of the child's or that worker's, they've been put into a situation, a violent incident occurs, the worker is injured, and then they're told to go back to work. And maybe the child is sent home, but they'll be reassigned to another student that needs support.
Right.
And nobody has talked to you about
how you doing?
How are you doing?
How are you doing?
How are you feeling? Do you know, like, is there anything we can do to help you? Like, just as, and because, and so that's partly like it all has turned into this very big cluster of issues because part of the turnover is coming from people who are just burning out.
Yeah. Yeah.
They just can't do anymore.
And there's no time to decompress. I have to decompress after my kids' meltdowns. I have to.
Yes.
You know, and
I have
sometimes as the mom you can't.
No.
You know, and that's why we drink.
Yeah.
You know,
that's looked down upon at work.
But it is when a child is in distress, all of us You must have experienced this as a
absolutely.
worker.
Yeah, we're in crisis
Absolutely.
as well.
Many times. You know, we are also, you know,
Yes.
how do we help? How do we help?
Yeah.
You know, so many good people being treated so badly now.
Mhm.
Okay, well, I'm just going to go to some of these
Yeah.
questions here, and I'll let you go, and thank you for staying a little longer.
Alright.
Brent says, hi there. Hi, Brent. A bit late joining, but I had a question. In 2016, when we were in our dark days, the union had offered to take the government then to court on our behalf to fight for proper ABA services without an age cap. I'm not sure if it was CUPE or another union, but we're facing the exact same situation here. Is CUPE considering taking the government to court over this?
But we actually haven't had that conversation, and it's one that we could have. I mean, the challenge just to be clear, we've taken the government to court in a whole bunch of different ways on a whole bunch of different issues. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But it isn't something we've talked about in relation to the changes that they've introduced now. But it would be something that we should, we could talk about this with others and see how can we apply pressure in every possible way?
Yeah. Well, Laura talks about this Laura, my mentor, who's, the greatest. If parents are going to go the legal route, or if you're going to be activists, don't do both.
Right.
Because it's so all-consuming.
Oh yeah.
And there are some people who are in litigation right now, and they can't share the details of what they're going through, dealing with exclusion, dealing with expulsions, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Hey, if anybody's got a lot of money,
that's the other piece.
let's do it. Jeff McGuire, 23,000 children, 75%, 3 out of 4 were languishing on wait lists under the previous program. Response. It is a gross misinterpretation of the 23,000 children who are young and waiting for ABA based on the size of, yep. Thanks, Jeff. We know that. Yep. Sorry, guys. I'm just having a quick look. Jeff, I love your questions. If they're more OAP kind of questions. Amanda, what is your advice to a parent who needs to attend their meeting with the school to prepare the children for kindergarten, to advocate for them for an EA in their classroom? What is the best thing for us to say to help us hope for one? So we've got a lot of parents who are signing up for school for the very first time. And they're not afforded the opportunity to have a transition team help them with registering their children, which you would have had you been finishing off the program. You would have been given a team to help you do that. That's a big question, but some good advice.
So good advice that I would...
as people prepare for April.
Yeah. Documentation.
Yeah.
I can remember the kindergarten teacher. I have an older daughter, and I remember sitting down with her and saying, he is not like his sister. And she's like, and she kind of laughed, but I came in with like the full list. Like I didn't pull any punches. I didn't pretend like he was going to be, I gave it the truth. And so, let us know, like, are they toilet trained? Do they still require some supports when it comes to toileting? How are they with feeding themselves? How are they with sensory inputs? Is it going to be like, kindergarten classrooms are my favorite place to work in, but they are loud, they are busy, they buzz constantly. There are, up to 30 or up to 28 is what it's supposed to be, but little bodies all finding their place in this world. It's play-based learning, so it's less structured than grade 1 and up. So if there are some things that need to be put in place, if you're working with visual schedules at home, bring copies of those so that we can mimic what those visual schedules look like. If there's, certain ways that they do that, like give it all, every single thing. Don't be, this is your baby, like sell it. It's like providing the resume or the job interview so that we know what we need to put in place, because it's hard and it's so sad, like after the fact, to find out, oh, there's been a visual schedule, and if we had only known it from the beginning.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's so much it's so much easier for me to have that in place.
Yeah.
Right? And it makes that transition go smoothly.
Okay. So communicate.
Tell it all.
Provide documentation.
Yeah,
Tell it all. Let it all out.
Let it all out.
You won't be judged.
We accept children into schools. That's why it's so important to have quality public education, because our, service is for everyone. We're not here to judge your baby. We're here to support your baby.
Okay. Hey, thanks.
Thank you.
Nice job.
Thanks.
Thank
You guys are
you.
pretty smart.
No, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And you guys are awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are awesome. More to come. I want to keep talking to these people. I hope that they'll find the time for us. And I'll bring Laura in because she's, we need Laura for big talks. Okay. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Laura. You're wonderful. And have a good weekend. Good luck, everybody. Stay in the fight. Bye.
And we're done.